Fever and I went on the backside of Nantucket, picked up some beautiful fluke, but one of the things we kept, because we'd always wanted to try, was dogfish. Andy, you've never actually cooked dogfish.
I've come close to being desperate enough to try eating it, but I've never quite, crossed the line.
Okay.
How was it?
Rich cracker
Oh,
crumbs.
exceptional.
So good.
That's about it.
Loved it.
Okay.
Salt, pepper,
So it's a
onions.
50-50 chance, right?
Pick wisely.
Fluke
Am I too
dogfish.
Dogfish.
Think so?
Fluke.
Yeah, it's Fluke.
All right, folks, I'm Andy Nabreski. Welcome to the On the Water Test Kitchen. Today I've been given a rather strange assignment. The guys were out on a fishing trip yesterday, brought back some dogfish, of all things, for me to cook up. So to be honest, I've never actually resorted to eating dogfish. I know people that have and say it's pretty good. It's very common in Europe, where it's commonly used in fish and chips. Hasn't really caught on in the US. There's a ton of dogfish around. This is spiny dogfish. Certainly no threat to the stocks of dogfish right now. They're everywhere. So today I'm going to be doing my favorite beer-battered, deep-fried dogfish. We'll see how this turns out. All right, so the captain of the boat actually, he did bleed and fillet the dogfish right away, which is critical to having them come out tasting good. They don't store well. They need to be filleted pretty much immediately. He also cut them into chunks. Now, since I'm deep frying them, I don't want to have all these bones in there. So what I'm going to sort of do, if you can see this cross section of our lovely spiny dogfish here, I'm just going to go after these loins here. We're going to make kind of some fish nuggets out of it. There is a lot of red meat here. Typically, anytime you see red meat on any kind of fish, it's no good. We're going to get rid of that. It turns brown when it's cooked, and it tends to be the kind of the fishiest, oiliest part of the meat. So I'm going to start at the top of these guys. Carefully slice down. Pop that off. And there is a small ridge of bones. It's actually cartilage. I'm not sure if that's going to cook down when it's gone through the cooking process. Just to be on the safe side, like I said, I've never done this before. I'm going to remove all of that. And it's going to leave us with this nice little kind of morsel of the shoulder meat off of this dogfish. I'll repeat that on the other side. And the rest of that we're going to discard. We got plenty of dogfish here. I'm not worried about using every little last bit and piece of it. And try to remove as much of this dark red meat as I can. You can see that the meat that we're left with, it is pretty white. Supposedly it cooks up nice and flaky. It does have a rather strange texture to it. It's almost kind of spongy. But it's white, it's clean, it looks good, and we're going to give it a go. We're going to add these to our bowl and discard all the scraps. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to soak this dogfish meat in buttermilk for about an hour. It does a lot of things. It tenderizes it, really kind of mellows out any kind of off flavors that you have in the meat. We're going to let these soak in the refrigerator for about an hour. While that's resting in the buttermilk in the refrigerator, let's get started on our batter. This past winter, I read up on about 7 or 8 different recipes from well-known sources on beer-battered fried fish. And what I found was they were all over the map. Some had eggs in them, some didn't. Some used flour, some used rice flour. There was a lot of variations between all of the different recipes. So I went through and I kind of tested them all out. Took the parts from some that I liked, some that I didn't. Kind of fine-tuned it into my own recipe, and that's what we're going to be using today on our dogfish. All right, we're going to start out with about 3/4 cup of regular white flour. And next we're going to do 3/4 cup of white rice flour. And cooks up really crispy, a lot crispier than flour does. So I like to do a mix of both. Next up, we got a tablespoon of baking powder. And that's just going to make the crust kind of rise up, get a little bit crispier. I'm going to do a teaspoon of salt. And next, this one's a little bit odd, we're going to do a teaspoon of sugar, which sounded kind of weird to me at first. I learned that from Chef Gordon Ramsay, who is from England, should know his fish and chips. And you don't really notice so much the sweetness that it adds, but it really helps the fish kind of brown up and gives it a nicer color. So it's a nice little touch. And now we're just going to add some seasonings. To about a teaspoon of paprika. Let's say half a teaspoon of chili powder. I'm going to do about the same amount, half teaspoon of white pepper. A little garlic powder. And last but not least, we're going to do a little accent. This is kind of my secret weapon. This is actually MSG. A lot of people think MSG's got a really bad reputation. I love this stuff. I put it in everything. Just kind of enhances flavors, really intensifies them and makes them, when you get something that you really just can't stop eating, chances are it's probably got some MSG in it. So you can use it lightly. I'd say maybe 1/8 of a teaspoon is all you need. All right, so we got all our dry ingredients in here. We're just going to give that a quick whisk. Make sure everything's mixed around properly and evenly. And that's about it. All we need is beer. We're going to wait to put the beer in until the very end. We want to keep those bubbles in, so we're going to get the deep fryer ready. As soon as that's hot and our fish is ready to go, we'll pour the beer in here and we'll be ready to batter fry some fish. All right, well, now you certainly could deep fry on the stovetop using a large cast iron pot. A lot of people go that route, and it's not a bad way to go, but it can be very temperamental. The nice thing about these guys is you have an electronic thermostat, and so we're constantly cooking at a maintained cooking heat, which is really what you need to do when you're deep frying. Another little tip when you're beer battering fish is your fryer comes with a basket. The problem with using this strainer in a deep fryer when you're doing anything really with a batter on it, is when you drop it into the hot oil, a lot of times that batter can go down into the holes in the bottom of it, cooks in there, and your fish will kind of come out stuck to the basket. And as far as your oil goes, I generally use canola oil just because it's the cheapest. You could certainly also use peanut oil, vegetable oil. They all come out pretty much with the same results. You're not going to really taste much of a difference. So whatever is cheaper. You just want to avoid using olive oil. It doesn't handle high temperatures well. Generally, I'm going to want the fryer to be between 1/3 and halfway full of oil. So that got it to about 1/4. I'm going to add a little bit more on top of that. And it's always a good idea to hang on to the empty bottle so when you're done, you can use a funnel, put the oil back in here, and throw it in the trash. All right, our oil is in the fryer. We're going to kick this bad boy up to about 360 degrees. If it's a bigger, thicker cut of fish, I'll drop the temperature down to 350. It's going to take a little bit more time in the frying pot. In the name of science, I'm going to be actually cooking up a little bit of Fluke today too. We're going to take these, both the Fluke and the dogfish, fry it up, bring it back to the office, do a little taste test. And this way we can kind of really get a good feel on what the dogfish actually tastes like. I have had fried Fluke, which is delicious, and hopefully it comes out almost as good. I would be happy. I'm just going to trim these guys down a little bit. These are nice fresh fillets caught out of Nantucket Sound yesterday. I'm just going to cut these into strips. That way I can tell what's the dogfish and what's the Fluke. Have a different shape. I just want to take a second look, make sure you don't have any bones in there. I thought I cleaned this up pretty good, and sure enough there was still one bone in there. Nobody likes getting a bone in their fish and chips. All right, now it's time to prep our dogfish. This has been sitting in buttermilk in the fridge for about an hour. And we're going to run this through a strainer. And our next step is we have 2 pie plates here. We're going to fill one with about a cup of flour. And the other one with about the same amount of rice flour. We got everything prepped up here, ready to go. Last thing we need is to put some beer into our beer batter. So I did some testing with different kinds of beers. I tried IPAs, I tried really light ales, I tried light beers. Essentially I found you couldn't really detect any kind of difference in taste on what kind of beer was used in the batter. So my advice is either use whatever you have on hand, which in this case is this fine Cisco Brewery Whale's Tail Pale Ale, one of my favorite beers. You could just use Bud Light. Certainly don't need to feel like you need to use an expensive IPA or something heavy. A lot of people do like brown beers, like a Guinness, which actually does give the batter a little bit more of color to it. But like I said before, it really doesn't have any difference on what the final result is going to taste like. And we're going to start out with about 1 full can of beer. We might need to add a little bit more later. We'll start with 12 ounces and see how it looks. And you really want to add the beer right before you cook. You want to keep those bubbles and that carbonation in the batter. If the batter sits, it's going to lose those bubbles. So this is kind of the last step before we fire the fish into the fryer. You want your batter to kind of have like the consistency of like a thin pancake batter. And right now this is just a little bit thicker than I'd like. I like a nice thin batter. I crack another one. Couple more ounces of beer, that gives me something to drink. All right, batter's ready to go. So the first step we're going to do here is actually a very important one. Some recipes I found call for just taking the fish, dumping it right into the batter, and then going into the deep fryer. Some of the other recipes I read recommended going the fish into flour and then the batter. I did test both ways, and believe it or not, dipping it into the flour first does make a big difference. It really makes that batter kind of cling to the fish. You don't have those like big clumps of crust popping off the fish. So we're going to take a couple of these guys. Give them a light toss in the flour. We go in the batter, and this is another nice little trick. So after they're in the batter, I'm actually going to put them back quickly into rice flour, then into the fryer. That's going to give them a really nice crispy crust on the outside. And this is definitely a messy ordeal. Another kind of important thing with deep frying is you never want to overcrowd the pan. I only got about 5 pieces in here right now. I'm working small batches. If you put too much in here, they're going to clump together. They're going to drop the temperature on the oil quite a bit. So the smaller the batches you work with when deep frying, the better your final product is going to be. These guys aren't going to take very long. They're pretty small pieces. So I'd say about 3 minutes tops and we should be done. While those guys are cooking, I'll get the next batch ready to go here. See, these guys are just starting to turn a nice golden brown. Those are the first pieces that went in. And it's been about 3 minutes, and I think those guys are done. Trying to multitask here. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, fried dogfish. Every time you're deep frying something, you can really tell by your eyes and ears when the fish is done. You can see there's a lot of bubbles coming out of that. That means there's still a lot of moisture escaping from the fish. Now once those bubbles kind of slow down and subside, that means pretty much the food is cooked, the moisture has all released from it. So as soon as those bubbles slow down, that tells you that they're done. Anytime you're deep frying anything, it's always good practice to avoid taking the food out and putting it on paper towels. Metal wire rack is definitely the way to go. Lets the oil kind of drip out of there. If you put them on top of paper towels, you can kind of act to steam the fish from below. Comes out not as crunchy, and it can also create the breading from breaking off of the fish. And we're going to want to give these just a little dusting of salt as soon as they come out. As you can see, this is definitely a messy affair. I got oil popping all over the place. I got batter all over me. I got dishes piled up in the sink. It's nothing better than having a nice piece of fresh fish right out of the fryer. So good. One of my favorite parts of the summer. All right, we've switched over now. We're doing our Fluke. As I said earlier, we're going to do a little taste test here. So, got a nice little batch of fried dogfish there. Still haven't braved myself up to try to eat a piece yet, but I will. It's a great way to serve fluke. It's a pretty soft meat. It doesn't hold up in the grill. And because it's got those thin fillets, I really like it for really any kind of fried fish presentation. Pretty soft texture. It's not that firm. Now, of all the fish in the sea, probably the one I like the least is the dogfish. I have a personal disdain for them. I always have. They tangle up lines. When you're bottom fishing in 200 feet of water and you pull up a dogfish, it's like being kicked in the stones. They steal baits, they wreck your jigs, but today we're going to find out if these things taste any good. We got a fried batch of dogfish here. We have our fried fluke here. We're going to take these back to the seagulls at the office and do a little taste test and see how these things came out.
It smells so good, man.
Get a nice little spicy remoulade sauce here. I'm just going to go a little bit of that.
Oh,
And if Mikey likes it, then we're going to like it.
I don't know, I'm going first here.
yeah, always let somebody else taste it first. Yeah, I think that's rule number one.
If he starts hyperventilating, it drops to the ground.
I think I got a spine.
Now, there might be a little cartilage in this, right?
I cleaned it all out.
Oh, sweet Jesus.
That's excellent.
It is actually really good.
Whatever it is good. I don't know what I actually bit into, though.
Taste-wise, I don't think it could really. It would be tough to tell the difference between this and cod, I think. Just
No, it's
based on
very
taste.
similar. The texture is a little bit different. It's almost kind of like a little bit of a sponginess to it, but it's not a bad thing. It's certainly flaky. You can see the little flakes in there.
That's delicious. And over in Europe, that's what they use for fish and chips.
Yeah, they got nothing else left. They killed off the cod years ago, so they've been eating dogfish. So hopefully we don't have to resort to that here anytime soon. But
Well, if we
they
had
do.
to, if they have to, if you guys have to, I'll tell you this right now, when you're on the backside of the Cape or any of these places up and down the East Coast nowadays, and you get into the dogfish, don't be afraid to take one. We saw it clean, Jimmy. That wasn't too bad.
Yeah, a little bit messy, but really not, pretty simple. Just a couple cuts and then skinning it right away. But cleaning it as soon as you catch it seems to be the most essential part.
Yeah, there's really no off flavor whatsoever in that.
Come on, Matt.
So what do we have here?
That could be fluke.
Dogfish?
I reckon that is. I don't know on that one. That's on the line. It's right in the Mason-Dixon line there.
Yeah. Is it true that they pee out of their skin?
I'm not a biologist.
Bon appetit then? So the dogfish has a little more juice to it. I think the fluke tastes better in the batter. So you don't know which one's
Oh, I know.
dogfish? You know. We don't.
I heard Chris say something that wasn't what he wants like
Thumbs
that,
up,
right?
thumbs down.
That's dogfish.
What do you think, Bob?
Damn good.